Sarah Thompson stood in her driveway, running her fingers one last time across the hood of her beloved 1967 Mustang. The cherry-red paints still gleamed in the morning sun, a testament to the countless weekends she'd spent maintaining it. The vintage car had been her father's final gift before he passed, but now it was time to let it go. As the buyer drove away with her prized possession, Sarah clutched the check that would finally make her children's dreams come true. 3 weeks later, the installation crew arrived at 7 a.m. sharp. Maya, Lucas, and Emma pressed their faces against the living room window, watching with unprecedented attention as the above-ground pool took shape in their modestly sized backyard. Sarah couldn't help but smile at their excitement, even as she calculated the extra hours she'd need to pick up at both the dental office and her weekend bookkeeping job to cover the maintenance costs. "Mom, can we skip school today? Please." Lucas bounced on his toes, his dark curls still messy from sleep. "I promise I'll do double homework tomorrow." "Nice try, buddy." Sarah ruffled his hair. "But the pool will still be here when you get home. Now go brush your teeth before we're late." As she ushered her children toward the bathroom, movement caught her eye. Through the window, she spotted their new neighbor, Mrs. Victoria Peterson, meticulously measuring the distance between the pool and the property line with what appeared to be a professional surveying tool. The woman had moved in just 2 months ago, bringing with her an air of superiority and a moving truck full of antique furniture that took 6 hours to unload, primarily because she kept demanding the movers take off their shoes before entering her house. Mrs. Peterson's arrival had coincided with a flood of anonymous complaints to the neighborhood association. The Martinez family's wind chimes were noise pollution, the elderly Mr. Johnson's bird feeders were attracting vermin, and the rainbow pride flag on the Williams porch was inappropriate for children. Sarah had hoped their paths wouldn't cross, but now, watching the woman document their pool with her iPad, that hope evaporated like chlorine in the summer heat. "Mrs. Thompson," the shrill voice cut across the morning air, "I don't suppose you've reviewed the 1987 Neighborhood Covenant regarding recreational installations." Sarah took a deep breath, pasting on her most diplomatic smile, the same one she used with difficult patients at the dental office. "Good morning, Mrs. Peterson. The pool company handled all the permits and regulations. Everything's up to code." "Codes change, dear." Mrs. Peterson's red lips curved into what might have been meant as a smile, but looked more like a warning. "And standards must be maintained. We wouldn't want our lovely neighborhood turning into some sort of water park." Before Sarah could respond, the school bus humped from the street. As her children rushed past with hurried hugs and backpacks half-zipped, she caught a glimpse of Mrs. Peterson taking photos with her phone, her perfectly manicured nails tapping away at the screen. Something in the woman's stance, the rigid posture, the calculating gaze, sent a chill down Sarah's spine, despite the warming morning air. This pool was supposed to be a symbol of new beginnings, of finally getting ahead enough to give her kids something special. Looking at Mrs. Peterson's disapproving scowl, however, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that it might instead become a battlefield. The video of Mrs. Peterson's meltdown spread through the neighborhood's social networks faster than her original Moral Decay livestream. But it wasn't the sprinkler-soaked photos or her theatrical gasping that captured everyone's attention. It was the damning evidence caught in the background of her own footage. "Mom, you need to see this," Maya said, hovering over Sarah's shoulder with her laptop. She played a clip from Mrs. Peterson's original stream, pausing at a crucial moment. There, reflected in Mrs. Peterson's window, was Tyler's phone screen, displaying not just the pool party, but a gallery of saved photos specifically of Maya. Sarah's maternal anger flared again, but this time it was tempered with understanding. "You know," she said quietly to Maya, "I think someone needs to have a conversation with Tyler, and it's not his mother." The next day, Sarah invited Tyler over, properly, through the front door for lemonade. The teenager slumped in his chair, face burning red, as Sarah calmly explained about privacy, respect, and appropriate ways to express interest in someone. By the end of the conversation, Tyler had deleted his photos, written a formal apology to Maya, and somehow found himself volunteered to help teach Sarah's younger kids swimming safety as community service. The neighborhood response was swift and creative. The Martinez family organized a splashback event, coordinating simultaneous pool parties in every backyard that had one. Mr. Johnson installed a bird bath specifically visible from Mrs. Peterson's window, complete with a miniature privacy screen that read "Birds only beyond this point." The Williams family added underwater lights to their pool that cycled through rainbow colors at night. But the real victory came through Maya. Inspired by the incident, she wrote an essay for her school's citizenship contest titled "Privacy in the Digital Age: A 12-Year-Old's Perspective." Her honest exploration of social media, surveillance, and community responsibility not only won first place, but was also published in the local paper. Mrs. Peterson's campaign for HOA presidency crumbled when her previous neighborhood in California reached out with eerily similar stories of pool-related crusades and attempted moral policing. Her bridge club quietly relocated to the community center, though they sent Sarah anonymous thank you notes for breaking the spell. Tyler, much to everyone's surprise, became a regular at the Thompson family barbecues. He proved to be a patient swimming instructor for Lucas and Emma, though he still blushed whenever Maya walked by. Mrs. Peterson developed a sudden interest in her back garden, which coincidentally faced away from the Thompsons' yard. Sarah kept the security cameras running, but added something new, a sign by the pool reading, "Joy is not a public nuisance." She installed it right next to the rainbow-colored pool toys she'd bought with Maya's essay prize money, all perfectly visible from Mrs. Peterson's window, though nobody could prove that was intentional. And on hot summer evenings, the sound of laughter still drifted over the fence, a reminder that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well and swimming freely. Maya's graduation pool party was everything a 12-year-old could dream of. Rainbow pool noodles bobbed between clusters of giggling girls, while inflatable flamingos drifted lazily across the water's surface. Sarah had transformed their backyard into a tropical paradise, with paper lanterns strung across the deck and fresh fruit kebabs arranged on bamboo platters. The early June sun painted everything in warm golden light, and the sounds of splashing and laughter filled the air. "Mom, can you take our picture?" Maya called out, adjusting her new turquoise swimsuit, a modest two-piece they'd carefully selected together at Target. She and her best friend Sophia posed with peace signs, water droplets glistening in their hair. Sarah raised her phone, but movement in Mrs. Peterson's second-story window caught her attention. The neighbor stood like a sentinel, her phone pointed directly at their yard. A small crowd had gathered behind her, members of her weekly bridge club. Sarah realized with growing unease. They weren't even trying to hide their disapproval, their faces pressed against the glass like spectators at a zoo. "Everyone out of the pool for cake," Sarah called, trying to shake off her discomfort. As the girls wrapped themselves in bright beach towels and gathered around the snack table, Sarah's phone buzzed, then buzzed again and again. Messages flooded in from other parents in the neighborhood. "Sarah, are you aware you're on Facebook Live right now? OMG, check the neighborhood group immediately. Is everything okay? Should we come get our kids?" With trembling fingers, Sarah opened the neighborhood Facebook group. There it was, a live stream titled "Moral Day in our Siomulan Itoi. Happening now." The camera zoomed in on her backyard, Mrs. Peterson's voice providing running commentary about inappropriate attire and declining property values. The video already had 78 views. Sarah's vision blurred with anger, but before she could march over to confront Mrs. Peterson, police sirens wailed in the distance. Maya's face crumpled with embarrassment as her friends exchanged worried glances, their joy evaporating like chlorine in the summer heat. "Everyone inside," Sarah said firmly, her protective instincts kicking in. "Girls, call your parents and let them know everything's fine. We're just having a slight neighbor issue." As she ushered the kids into the house, Sarah noticed Mrs. Peterson's teenage son, Tyler, skulking behind his mother's prized hydrangea bushes, his phone also raised suspiciously. The irony might have been funny if Sarah's heart wasn't pounding with rage and disbelief. Two police cruisers pulled up outside, their lights casting surreal blue patterns across the fence. Through her security camera feed, Sarah watched Mrs. Peterson practically skip down her front steps to meet them, a thick folder tucked under her arm like a weapon. Sarah squared her shoulders and took a deep breath. She had faced down angry dental patients, juggled 2 jobs while raising 3 kids alone, and sold her most precious possession to give her children happiness. She wasn't about to let some self-appointed neighborhood morality monitor ruin her daughter's special day. Officer Rodriguez and her partner approached the scene with visible reluctance, their faces suggesting this wasn't the emergency call they'd expected. Sarah stood at her front door, garden hose coiled casually in her hands, a habit from her morning plant watering routine that now felt strangely comforting. "Ma'am," Officer Rodriguez began, but Mrs. Peterson's voice cut through the air like a bandsaw. "Finally, law enforcement." Mrs. Peterson's heels clicked against the sidewalk as she rushed forward, her bridge club friends trailing behind like a Greek chorus in pastel cardigans. "I have documented evidence of weeks of inappropriate behavior." She thrust her folder at the officers. Sarah's stomach dropped as she watched Mrs. Peterson flip through page after laminated page of surveillance photos, each carefully dated and annotated. There were shots of her children swimming, getting into the pool, eating popsicles on the deck, even one of Sarah herself doing morning yoga in modest workout gear. "You've been photographing my children?" Sarah's voice came out in a dangerous whisper. The garden hose creaked in her tightening grip. "For weeks." Officer Rodriguez's partner leafed through the photos, his expression darkening. "Ma'am," he addressed Mrs. Peterson, "are you aware of privacy laws regarding photographing minors without parental consent? This is about community standards." Mrs. Peterson's voice rose an octave. "I have signatures from concerned neighbors." She brandished a petition, but Sarah recognized the 3 signatures, all from elderly residents who'd recently complained about Mrs. Peterson's aggressive visits to discuss neighborhood improvements. Those signatures were coerced. A new voice called out. Everyone turned to see Mr. Johnson, the retired judge from 2 doors down, striding over with his morning coffee still in hand. "Victoria Peterson threatened to report my bird feeders as health hazards if I didn't sign." Mrs. Peterson's face flushed crimson. That's defamation, and irrelevant. Look at these children, practically unclothed in public view." That's when Sarah noticed movement in Mrs. Peterson's upstairs window. Tyler, Mrs. Peterson's son, was visible now, his phone still aimed at Maya's party through his bedroom window. Sarah's maternal instincts flared. "Officers," she said calmly, raising her phone to display her security camera feed, "I'd like to file a harassment complaint, and I have some concerns about surveillance from that second-story window." Mrs. Peterson followed Sarah's gaze up to her own house, her face draining of color as she spotted her son. In her moment of distraction, her grip on the folder loosened. A gust of wind caught the papers, sending her evidence scattering across the lawn, right through the spray of Sarah's yard sprinklers, which had clicked on with their automatic timer. The carefully curated photos wilted in the water as Mrs. Peterson scrambled to rescue them, her designer outfit growing increasingly damp. Her bridge club friends, suddenly remembering urgent appointments elsewhere, began a strategic retreat.